Yes, I do realize that I have already reviewed it on this channel before because it's a book that I love to talk about. But I thought maybe I was going to go ahead and skip it while I was doing Into the Multiverse. So I asked a bunch of people, hey, do you think I should go ahead and include it while I go through Into the Multiverse? And pretty much the answer was unanimous, absolutely. And I said, well, you know what? Your hair is winter fire, January embers. Well, my heart burns there too. George reached, and the clown seized his arm, and George saw the clown's face change. What he saw then was terrible enough to make his worst imaginings of the thing in the cellar look like sweet dreams. What he saw destroyed his sanity in one clawing stroke. "They float," the thing in the drain crooned in a clotted, chuckling voice. It held George's arm in its thick and wormy grip. It pulled George towards that terrible darkness where the water rushed and roared and bellowed as it bore its cargo of storm debris towards the sea. George craned his neck away from that final blackness and began to scream into the rain, to scream mindlessly into the white autumn sky which curved above Derry on that fall day in 1957. His screams were shrill and piercing, and all up and down Witcham Street people came to their windows, were boarded out to their porches. "They float," it growled. "They float, Georgie. And when you're down here with me, you'll float too." Hiya, Georgie and bookworms. Welcome back into the Multiverse, guys. Today we're talking about the 1986 horror classic, It by Stephen King. My most expensive book that I own, because I don't want to tell you how much I paid for this first edition. But that's a conversation for another time. The 13th published novel under Stephen King's own name took him 4 years to complete. I think it had a pretty mixed reaction upon release, but over time, it's pretty much become like a staple of the horror genre. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't know this story by this point, even if they haven't read it, even if they don't know the movies. There's things about it that they do know, even if they don't know that it is from this creation of one of the most iconic villains in the whole multiverse. Maybe not his most popular, but maybe his most recognizable by casual audiences, much less than just the constant readers. Obviously, he's going to be in your top 5 King villains list anytime you see anything. But I think over time, he's actually become one of the most iconic horror villains ever, including the movies. So lots of background with this book for me personally. This was my gateway to Stephen King. This was the book that I read as a 15-year-old after I got interest because of the 1990 miniseries with Tim Curry. And it was just a story that just completely, I had to keep it a secret from my folks. I put the full story in that Great Awakening kind of video that I did about Stephen King, about how I became a constant reader. But basically, this is what led me down the path of the beam to all things Stephen King. So it's a book that's always going to be very dear to me, and that's why I have no problems talking about it again. Like I said, the last time I did it was just because the It Part 2, the movie, was coming out. So I want to kind of get a review out there for people who are curious about the book. But yeah, that's a different time on the channel. And I want to give this Into the Multiverse treatment. So I want to make sure I went ahead and did that. I mean, like I said, I don't feel like there's anybody who doesn't know this story by now. And most people that watch the channel know that I love it. It is my second favorite book of all time, behind only Dune up there. So obviously my favorite Stephen King story. And I want to talk about it. Now, is it more than just blood or guts? Well, guys, I mean, we're going to talk about it here. Let's go ahead and get into what is it about. Welcome to Derry, Maine. It is a small city, a place as hauntingly familiar as your own hometown. Only in Derry, the haunting is real. They were 7 teenagers when they first stumbled upon a horror. Now they are grown-up men and women who have gone out into the big world to gain success and happiness. But the promise that they made 28 years ago calls them to reunite in the same place where as teenagers they battled an evil creature that preyed upon the city's children. Now children are being murdered again, and the repressed memories of that terrifying summer return as they prepare once again to battle the monster lurking in the sewers of Derry, known as Pennywise, the dancing clown, guys. And that takes us into 1986's It. Like I said, by now I feel like everyone's kind of familiar of what the story is, so that is really just scraping the surface of what this tale is about. But guys, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into what makes it good or bad. Right off the bat, good. This is the quintessential story of friendship overcoming impossible odds. The bond that these 7 characters develop over these almost 1,400 pages is second to none. I have not found another story where I have bonded as the reader with this cast of characters so quickly and so immensely. This is like the tightest knit group, and it makes you flash back to your own childhood of that group of friends that you swore you would have forever, even though you might not even talk to them anymore. But when you're 7, 8, preteen, you really think those people that you're hanging out and running around the streets with right now, that's going to be your friends for life, right? Really brings back that feelings, and just every time you think these characters, there's just no way they can get out of this. They believe in one another. And I know that might sound hokey to some people, but I think it's really genuinely written here. King, at his coming of age, being his forte, as I always say, it is at its peak here. I think this is everything that I loved about the coming of age parts of The Body. You might know as Stand By Me, but The Body from different seasons. And he just kind of cranks it to a new level here with what he's able to get across in words, with how close these characters become over this time under great duress, and the good times and the bad. Again, nothing has come close to this for me in touching that. Look, these 7 friends, look, they go through hell together twice, so it isn't just, innocence lost. I mean, it isn't just the end of childhood. It's a lot of things, because it deals with them both in their childhood and in adulthood, so it's got both layers there that I don't know how anyone wouldn't draw a connection with these characters over the time. Ultimate coming of age story. He hits all of those familiar beats here, just with a little bit more frights involved in like a body or something like that. But again, you will feel like the 8th member of the Losers Club by the end of this. I mean, each one of them have so many things. If I broke down each character, this review would be 2 hours long. Like I said, I've already kind of done that review. Sticking to the format rules here, I'll say this contains one of my favorite literary characters ever in Benjamin Hanscom. This is Ben. He is the little fat kid when he was younger, and then he's gone on to greater success, and he's thin and stuff later in life. But it's one of those things that resonated with me because I was that fat kid in junior high, and then I saw a lot of friends after after I'd switched schools, and I went back home and saw something that they're like, I can't believe you're the same person anymore. That was something that obviously resonated with me, that you could change not just your body style, but you could change your whole life and be a completely different person between seeing people. So I think Benjamin and Larry Underwood from The Stand are probably my 2 favorite literary characters by Stephen King, just because of how close they feel to something that I can relate to as the everyman kind of character. But Bill, Beverly, Beverly is a lot of things. I hear a lot of people kind of be critical on that. They'd be like, why is she the only girl in this? That isn't realistic. Something that I learned as a boy, this might be wrong. Again, all I can go off of is my own experiences here as a boy growing up in the 1980s, is I had a lot of friends that were girls, and they just hung around with a bunch of guys. And anytime anyone would kind of bring why, is something that I learned from her. Her name was Heidi, by the way. I haven't talked to her in 40, 30 something years, so hope she's well. Anyway, what she said was that girls are really mean on a mental level. Where boys, it was real physical. You get afraid of getting beat up. With girls, it was like emotional scarring. And what she had always told me was that boys are nicer. Girls were just so mean. So I knew a lot of, you'd have the one girl hanging out with like 6 guy friends kind of thing. And it was more of a kind of like it is here with the Losers. They love her, but it's not like they're in love with her. I mean, some of them might be. I think Bill and Ben obviously were in love with her, but a lot of them, like Richie, kind of look at her as like a younger sister kind of thing. But, they love her. They treat her like she's just one of the guys. They don't think anything differently because of her gender. And I think that's just a very endearing part of her character and her arc through this book. So one of my favorite written ladies by King himself, and obviously some of my favorite dude characters, and my favorite villain. Hey, let's talk about the villain. Yes. I always say that King's books are only as good as his best villain, and this one has several. Obviously, the big one here, Pennywise, the dancing clown, Bob Gray. I think one of the most iconic, I'm going to use the word iconic a lot, because I feel like this book has reached that status. One of the most iconic introductions to a villain I've ever seen in any story ever. I think someone who hasn't even read this, doesn't know the first thing about it, understands the reference about clowns in the sewers. The introduction to this with Georgie is one of the most gruesome and terrifying things I have ever read in my life. Reading that at 15 years old, I was like, oh my God, who hurt you, Stephen? Oh my God. So yeah, it's just a visceral, brutal, incredible scene to really open up the first 100 pages of this book. it really sets the tone for what's coming on about these. Like, most of these stories, the bad things happen to older people. The kids are always safe, though. Right off the bat, he's telling you, the kids aren't safe in this one. And I think that was something that people were kind of scared to kind of tread into that territory when he did this. So that was just like right off the bat, oh my God, he is pulling no punches with this whatsoever. But the idea that Pennywise can like take on the visage of anything that you're most frightened of. You're scared of spiders? He can do that. You're scared of a werewolf. You're scared of a bat. It doesn't matter. A bird. Whatever your fear is, he can use that against you somehow. And that, along with you're the only one that can see it, that is some scary stuff. He might not be my favorite King villain, but he's like 1A, 1B with Randall Flagg probably for me. I don't know. That's a list I might do in the future, my favorite Stephen King villains. But he is, if anyone wants to say this is King's best villain, I'm definitely not going to argue with them. Just absolutely as important and iconic as any, like Freddy, Jason, any of that stuff that you can think of, movie monsters, the Universal movie monsters like that. I think he deserves a place at that table, and the success of that movie in 2017 really kind of put that further into the pop culture of, yeah, I think that's not just someone who really loved the book saying that. It's really very, very true that he is a very well-known and very important horror icon at this point. Another good thing here is the history of Derry that it always kind of brings up through the pages is, Pennywise didn't just show up in, the 80s. He's been here a while. He's been in Derry for a long time, and you start getting some of these tidbits about, each 28-year segment that he wakes up and decides to start killing again. And you see how long this guy has been wreaking havoc. And you get maybe one of the most trippiest Lovecraftian kind of sequences in some of the stuff. And this is really what really opened up some of his multiverse stuff here. And it's just so many deep things with this lore and this story that you really wouldn't expect. But I really like that this kind of continued King's theme of no matter how scary the monsters are, humans are the real monsters in his story. I think Henry Bowers and Tom Rogan might be the true villains of this book. They are both terrifying people, and you get Tom during the present day stuff, and you get Henry in present day and in the flashbacks, and he's just a character that will stick in your memory. It's a name you'll never forget. And some of the things that he does, especially to Ben, is just something that's like, look, I got bullied a lot as a kid, never quite to that level, but I think bullying in the 1950s was a little different even than it was in the 1980s. Like, it's different now than it was, in the 1980s. And now it's, hop on Instagram and tell someone they're ugly, something like that. But if mine was, I was afraid of getting beat up after the bus stop. I was never afraid of like being like carved with a knife, something like that. So it's real touchstone of what was going on during that kind of thing about the way that the evolution of bullying, I think, is a very big theme in this. But it's just that the town knows. The older people in the town, they know what's going on in this town, and they just turn a blind eye to it. They just kind of pretend it isn't there. They do nothing to protect stuff. So again, grown-ups and just humans overall are they're the real villains of this story when you want to look at the greater scheme of things. Sure, you got the big scary monster and stuff, but the big scary monster can kind of do some things, but humans don't need anything special. They can come and fuck with you whenever they feel like it. The biggest thing that you wouldn't expect with a book like this is the emotional beats. You will be put through the ringer in this book, both with the group in the 50s and in the 1980s. There is some stuff in here that will really, really tug right here because it's just so powerful. And I still think there's people who have so many criticisms of the ending. And there's an event in the ending that's kind of like, it's kind of not what I was hoping for. But I'm talking about the ending pages, like the last couple chapters in here is some of the most bittersweet and just tear-pulling stuff that I've ever read in a Stephen King book. I think only 11/22/63 really got to me harder than this. And it's just, I don't want to spoil that for you, obviously, but it is absolutely gut-wrenching the way that this ends. But I call it a pretty happy ending as far as King endings go, but just the emotional beats of it are just so heavy and so wonderfully delivered, and it's just absolutely devastating, soul crushing, any term you want to use like that. And I grew up in the 1980s, a Gen Xer here, and here's the thing, I had parents that obviously were around in the 1950s, so I think that this was a good snapshot in time of childhood in the 1950s. It really I felt like it was something that kind of, hey, I can understand some things that my parents went through that maybe I didn't, and I thought that was really a neat twist, a wrinkle for when I read it. Obviously, it's going to be different for everybody there. But yeah, it's, again, I think that that's a really neat thing. It's like when I watched American Graffiti for the first time, and I got to feel like, wow, it just felt like a different time. Same with this. I really like it. Beyond the Horror, it really captures that, much like The Body did, in a way that no other authors really been able to. And I think that's kind of an underrated thing about it. That's why I didn't like that they changed it to the 1980s and present day in the movies. I wish that they had kept it in the 50s and 80s like the miniseries did. And that's why I still consider the miniseries the superior version, the superior adaptation of this story. But there are a couple bad things here. I mean, length might be a problem for you. 1,138 pages on hardcover. I think the paperback's like 1,400 pages. Yeah, it's a hefty read. Me, just like with The Stand, I could have used another 200, 300 pages and fine. I was loving it. It's one of those things is if you don't go into it like, oh God, this is going to be such a long read, and you go into it like, hey, this is just what I'm going to be doing for a while, you're going to have the ride of your life, because I think it's every bit the horror version of The Stand in that way, just seen from different lenses, and obviously not in the post-apocalypse. But I definitely see comparisons there between the two. Also, some references, either you might not get it, they might be a little outdated. And I'm not just talking about the things that are, going to upset a lot of people. I don't necessarily mean that. I mean, there are those too. There's some verbiage used that's going to upset some people. But I think that there's a lot of terms that are used, like haystack, like beep beep Richie and stuff. You're going to be like, what are you talking about? Again, I had parents that grew up in the 1950s, so I kind of heard some of these things before, so it wasn't completely foreign to me. But it might be one of those things where you're like, all I'll say is just roll with it. I mean, like when Richie starts doing a voice, just kind of roll with it. It's not a big deal. You got to understand that radio was the primary form of entertainment then, and doing voices that you hear on the radio, yeah, that would be something that that kids would do during that time period. The big one here is the themes of childhood sexuality in this book. I think by now everyone, as well as they know the whole clown the sewer thing, they know about that scene, and you know what I'm talking about. When I did my last It review, I didn't talk about this at all, because I said I felt like that's all they ever want to talk about. And I still think that that's a problem. I still hate that this absolutely amazing book, 99.5% of it is absolutely amazing, and they only want to talk about that 0.5%. And it deters them from reading it, or it makes people rage quit while they're reading it. Look, I'm not defending it at all. I'm like, what? Stephen was just a little too, at the time, I think, when he did that. I can't believe that got past his editor. Honestly, I feel like this was a time when his books were printing money for Viking, so they were willing to let anything slide. But I understand what he was going for. He's explained it in the past about, basically being like an analogy for the transition from childhood into adulthood. I think there's different ways to go about it. I think both movie adaptations have done a better job of that, obviously. But again, it doesn't ruin the book. At least it didn't for me. If it's just too much for you, I'm not going to say that you're stupid or something. I just hate that that's what the book has almost become known for at this point. Hey, you know that book? Stephen did this in that book. There's so much more great in this book. I hate that that's the one thing that everyone talks about. But yeah, I definitely put it to the bad. It was a very, very poor decision, even if I understand what he was going for. It just, no, Stephen. No. Okay, so let's talk about why you should read it. Now look, obviously the big one is if length doesn't bother you, this is arguably King's greatest book. Every bit the modern horror classic as anything else out there, I think that you can think of. You think about authors that are still living, that have wrote some good scary books. I don't see any of them that I would put above this. I think it was Nicholas Eames I had on recently, and he said, I'm not just going to say something's better because it's old. I think that absolutely applies here. There might be some horror classics that obviously you would put before this, but of modern writers, and I still consider the man modern because he's still pumping out a novel. He's got a new one coming out this year. I think it's at the top for me. I think it's going to be at the top for a lot of people. It's not just because it was the first King book that I wrote. I know other people will be like, that's just kind of nostalgia for you. Look, I still think that The Stand is his best book, but this is still absolutely my favorite book because I love the coming-of-age tale, and I love horror, and he takes those two, and it's the perfect blend. Every bit The Body with a big scary monster in it, a big scary monster that knows your deepest, darkest fears and wants to scare the ever-living hell out of you before he devours you. Yes, that is something I'm definitely here for. I feel like this is a horror classic in the way that 50 years from now, people are still going to be reading and discussing this book because it's that important. And now that it is in the pop culture zeitgeist, it's gotten kind of a new life. More people are reading it now than they ever would have before that movie came out. And I'm so happy for that. But look, to me, it's kind of the same I said with This Is the Body. Is it just kind of makes you feel like you stepped into a time machine back to those, endless summers of your own childhood, where you're hanging with your best friends and stuff. I mean, hopefully you didn't have a big scary monster coming at you. But, other than that, it really captures that sense of childhood innocence in the best ways. And I can't say enough about it. If you like The Body, obviously you're going to enjoy this. Very similar. Definitely felt like it was the setup for this. And if you are a fan of the coming-of-age story, like I am a fan of the coming-of-age story, you're not going to find one better than this. If I have any final thoughts here, guys, it's just not only was this my gateway to King, this was pretty much my endearment to him as an author. I was going to read anything that he wrote after reading this because this was the most incredible book I had read up to this point. I had never even read a book a quarter as long as this one. That's how much of an investment it was for me at 15. So, yeah, I was every bit just into this in a way that I cannot explain. It just completely grabbed me in ways that no other book has ever done before. And it's instrumental in the ways I approach things like friendship and love and bullying and stuff like that, and loss. These are things that I say, just like with Dune, how it had a very big impact on the way that I approached fear. This had a very big impact on the way I approached all those things. And it really felt like it changed me as a person when I read it. And that's not hyperbole. I really feel that way about this. The transition from childhood to adulthood, perfect timing for me. Being 15 years old, I had just moved to Houston. I didn't know anybody. That's why I was reading this that summer. It was just perfect timing for me. So that's why I feel like it's kind of landed much more than just nostalgia. But I resonated with only the kids. When I read it as a teenager, I was kind of like, oh, it's kind of one of the grown-up chapters. I don't know how I feel. Let's get back to the kids. I read it again a couple years ago, not only as a parent, but obviously as approaching 40, and it was a whole new book for me again, because I resonated both with the childhood parts and the adulthood parts, because, as you're an adult, you got much different fears than you have when you're a kid. But you know what? Even as an adult, you're scared of an 8-foot-tall, clown with razor-sharp teeth, right? So it's something that I feel like really was a new experience reading it. And I've said that about several of his books, is doing them on a reread. It's much different reading it at this age than it was when I was 15, and I appreciate it for different ways. I think that's what just makes King such a dark wizard, right? In the end, I just hope that more people can quit talking about that one scene and give the book a try. Talk about all the great things that are in this book, because it's a life-changing story if you give it a chance. And just try the book for yourself. That's all I implore you to. Please try the book for yourself. Don't go on with anything. Don't think about the movies. Don't think about that sex scene that just drives everybody nuts. Don't think about any of that stuff. Just go into it with fresh eyes and give it a shot. And I think you're going to wind up happy, because it's every bit a journey worth taking. Just like I said with The Stand, this one, take your time with it. Don't try to speed run through it. Just sit back, enjoy the ride, and you're going to have a great time. Now, I talk more in depth about spoilers right here, and what I did in that video was I did the first half non-spoiler, the second half full spoiler. So this, I'm just going to kind of move into Multiverse Connections. I'm not going to talk about all of the spoilers right now, because I've already done that, and I feel like you would get more out of that, because this video would be over an hour if I went into spoilers here too. But yeah, you want to know my thoughts, they're right there. I definitely think that you'll find what you're looking for. But let's get into some Multiverse Connections, guys. I just want to say right up front, minor spoilers for the rest of the multiverse. I talk about some of the crossovers with stuff like this. I don't consider them major spoilers. I think that's going to break books for you, but I have gotten some complaints about it in the past. So if you want to wait until you've read the entire multiverse, bookmark this, come back afterwards. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, now you're going to buckle up, guys, because this is the biggest Multiverse Connection section yet, because we haven't gotten really deep in the Dark Tower. So here we go. First up, Children of the Corn. Ben gets directions at one point, and the directions mentioned going through the deserted town of Gatlin. Now, that is the town where the children worshipped at. Christine Belch Huggins, let's just say a version of Belch Huggins, does give older Henry Bowers a ride from Juniper Hills in the 1958 Plymouth Fury, known as Christine, in Pet Cemetery. Georgie was buried at Mount Hope Cemetery. It's the same place where Gage Creed was temporarily buried. Shawshank Redemption, I think I mentioned this when I did that review, is Eddie Corcoran, a character mentioned here. His stepfather served time in Shawshank. In Roadwork, I don't know if there's like particular things, but I know that Derry was mentioned like so many times in that. I feel like there was probably some brief mention. I didn't reread Roadwork when I was doing this, so I don't recall exactly. In Dead Zone, the Reunited Losers Club, when they're having that meeting at the Chinese restaurant, Frank Dodd, the serial killer, does come up there a couple of times. In The Shining, you have Dick Halloran. He served in Vietnam with Mike's father, and that comes up in their dealings with the Black Spot before the Black Spot fire, and of course during. In The Stand, you see a couple of references to the Red Wheel, I think it's called. That's Ben Hanscom's favorite bar, as well as Hemingford Home, something like that, of Nebraska. That's where Ben is living at the time. Tommy Knockers, Big Engine Woods gets referenced more than once, I believe, and I think one of Eddie's aunts live in Haven or something like that. But then there's this character, Tommy, takes like a detour to Derry, and he's pretty sure what he describes as seeing the deadlights from Pennywise coming in the sewer. But it does really say that could have been a hallucination, because, I mean, you will know as well as I do, you get caught in them deadlights, you ain't getting out. And there's so much going on in Tommy Knockers that it's hard to say. Misery, I think it's said that when Paul Sheldon was a boy, he lived next to Eddie's family. So that's a nice little tie-in there. And I didn't realize that one until I reread it. In Dreamcatcher, there is the phrase Pennywise lives when they go to Derry near a standpipe. I don't know if it's the same standpipe that we're thinking of, but again, always fun little tie-ins. 11/22/63, when Jake is in 1958, he does meet Beverly and Richie there, so that's always a good time. And then, of course, The Dark Tower, book number 3, The Wastelands. You have the first introduction of Matron the Turtle, or the first since then. And to me, this is when the first time I realized, holy shit, this stuff is all taking place in the same kind of little universe here. I had no idea. I thought Dark Tower was like its own thing. Before this, I'd only seen like references like, Castle Rock. You'll see a character's name once in a while, something like that. This was the first moment reading The Wastelands where I was like, holy crap, this is interesting stuff, and really gets into the deeper meaning of the beams and being what holds the multiverse together and stuff. And I won't spoil any of that. I'll talk to that stuff when I get to The Wastelands, talking Dark Tower, which I'm resuming sometime this year. It's on the schedule. But guys, that's all the connections I have for now. Huge amounts. And there's more. There's more references out there, I know, to Pennywise. There's several books that mention Derry, so I don't want to mention every book that even brings up Derry or something like that. But there's more that I'm missing, I'm sure. I always encourage you to check out my dude Jaime Fuego's channel on The Horror Show if you want to get a little more deeper into all those multiverses, especially Dark Tower connections, because he is the man. But guys, that's all I got. One of the greatest books of all time. Here it is, man. I hope you guys will check it out. Thank you for listening, and make sure that you float.